Hello again. As I progress through this case, um, I want to spend a little bit more time on the concept of narrative, because it's actually very important. Um, in a situation, we see more of this in life where narrative is built to fit to reverse engineer a conclusion, and our case is a powerful example of that. And I've given other examples, such as the FCA's approach towards wealth tech. When I engage with those, um, they wanted to completely rewrite history to the extent where they wouldn't discuss their role in the wealth tech scandal prior to their intervention in April 2023, and wanted to effectively um, coerce me to produce a witness statement to that effect, where nothing before mattered. So they wanted to craft a narrative that suited their objective, not really what the truth was. So I've spoken a lot on the other channel about the sophist approach, and it's very much like that. Now, another interesting scenario was the Dawn Sturgis inquiry, which I produced a video on that prior to this one, and you can see the same situation. Hughes, who clearly was working towards an outcome of this was a outrageous attempt to assassinate Mr. Skirple by Russian agents using Novichok, and ultimately it was sanctioned by Vladimir Putin. Now, I didn't have to spend long on that report, just over an hour inquiry, to be able to identify some very, very serious shortcomings in it. And I won't go over them because I'll be wasting time, but they're noted in the previous video. And if I was going to be one of the most powerful things of that was Yulia Skirple's statement and her brief words, because to me, she stood out as an intelligent, articulate lady who was speaking pragmatically rather than freely. And I think the way she articulated herself in that difficult situation left some, for those who are willing to read the narrative, insight into perhaps what her thinking was, and her thinking seemed to be very different to what the inquiry suggested in terms of what happened in this awful affair, in terms of how it came about. I suspect the rape gang inquiry had a brief look at the makeup of that today when it was published. I suspect it'll be the same. Very much managed accountability. I hope I'm wrong. That's the early impressions I get. So moving back onto our case, as I mentioned, there was the parental assessment, which was essentially you're forced to provide information to an authority that already has a conclusion, that is describing themselves as against you, and is just building a narrative to suit the outcome of a long-term care order. The early stages of it were farcical. We, my wife was having her meetings with Grant, and so was I, and they started off roughly in sequence, and then she ended up a little ahead of me, or the other way around. But in our first meetings, I mean, there was no real sensible structure to them. A bit of chronology, but they gave you no ideas of what questions they wanted to ask, because they didn't want to leave an audit trail, because you could show effectively they were just trying to build a story, to build a narrative against you. And I remember after we had our first meetings, they went into a case management hearing that Hudson was working on the case at that time, and granted that sort of suggested in notes that our answers were strongly coordinated, which is extraordinary because one, at which time she just covered the early parts of our life, and one of us grew up in England, and one of us grew up in Poland. So they were very, very different systems and countries at that time. We had different family structures, and you, it was just extraordinary. And you thought, this is the embitteredness of it. And that's kind of how it works, because social workers are selected carefully. There's a lot of turnover because some of them just can't take it, what they're asked to do, and leave. But those who stay are picked to do certain jobs. And it is the Russian doll system, because the legal professionals work in the background and effectively send the social workers out to do the nasty things, and the contact workers sometimes. And then they have that arm's length. So if something were to go wrong, they would, current term is throw people under the bus. They would do that to the social worker. And so they're orchestrating, but in a way would never direct, or they think they have made some mistakes here, and never directly implicates them. And it was also when this spiteful social worker, Donna Grant, had suggested that I'd, again in this case management hearing via the barrister Kristen McKee, suggested that I withhold contact details of my mother, who had passed a number of years prior of lung cancer. That was immediately available to them in the bundle. Elder daughter had made that very point, and they, it's brought to their attention, but doesn't fit the narrative, so it's ignored. There's also, at this time, we'd raised serious concerns about racism and destruction of the Polish heritage of our younger daughter. There was harassment and very poor treatment of Polish interpreters. In one meeting early February, a contact worker, Alison McAlpine, had stormed into a room while we were waiting for her to arrive so we could have a meeting. There was younger daughter, wife, and I, and a lovely Polish interpreter, elderly lady, but she had a really kind heart, and really, she described herself as doing this work because she was a mother herself, and she was a very beautiful character she had. This McAlpine lady stormed in and said, "Oh, Donna said no Polish, no Polish, no Polish." And we said, "Well, why is her interpreter here then?" And she was so aggressive and so unpleasant that my wife was in tears and the younger daughter was in tears, and the younger daughter was just too scared to speak Polish after that. Even when she climbed down and said, "Oh, I didn't realise it was allowed in this meeting," it was disgusting. We raised that, suggested the lady and Grant herself perhaps undergo some racial awareness training, but again, it didn't fit the narrative, so it was dismissed. It's also worth noting as well that the judge, Rachel Hudson, this lady who's made these mendacious allegations about the car for me, and on whom Northumbria police appear to be acting on as I identify this this extreme level of racism and corruption relating to our case, and indeed the broader industry, was presiding over the hearings in a very dominant way in respect to these case management hearings. So there'd be representatives from the Polish consulate who would join and observe, but she would never allow these issues to be raised. So effectively, the local authority would completely dominate the hearings, and you'd get no opportunities to raise these issues. And around about this time, I was becoming a litigant in person, because I could see that there was no the way the case was being managed just looked like a giant game of shadow boxing, with barristers who were just being picked from here and everywhere coming in. You didn't have settled barristers; they were coming in just to earn a gig, didn't know the name of the children, were poorly prepared, and it was repugnant in many ways. Um, and so she would suppress the hearings in such a way that these factors could never come out. She didn't want the Polish consulate to know what they were doing in terms of destroying this emotional attachment, and suppressing and erasing younger daughter's Polish heritage. And that's ultimately why she didn't allow them to attend, make an invitation for them to attend the final hearing, because the final hearing is over several days, and she knew that she wouldn't be able to suppress that, and it would come to their attention. And even if they couldn't do anything, they would probably be very, very concerned by what they saw in terms of this cultural genocide. Um, Also, some other things came up with older daughter. There was an incident where we had there was a scenario where when she was in her foster care after Christmas, she sort of there'd been an incident where she called the boy who she disclosed to, who I think was been terribly manipulated by her, late at night, claiming that she was going to cut herself. Foster carers were downstairs, so she had a chance to seek assistance from them. She was also given numbers of other people to call, but she called him, and I think that said quite a lot, because we'd sort of noticed that, effectively, that a lot of these allegations are being channeled through him. And there was and I mentioned another. I'm trying to do this as sensibly as I can. A lot of these allegations were channeled through him, and he would, along with the girl, had sort of gone to the school and discussed them, which was the right thing to do for them. And I think there was definitely an asymmetry between what older daughter thought the relationship with this boy was. And I think when they went back after Christmas, um, that asymmetry probably started to come, or the way I understand it, come more apparent to her. And there was this emotional manipulation almost of the boy, which thought was deeply troubling. Must have put him under terrible stress. And we'd had a lot of trouble with her in the past about threats, and there were other things, and there'd been allegations of bullying at another school that put me on very, very bad terms with one of her previous schools, because she was repeating these bullying allegations all the time, and the school kept saying, "Well, we can't see anything. We're dealing with it, and it should be dealt with." And I gave her the benefit of the doubt, and ended up sort of being on very poor terms with the school, saying, "Well, I'm going to have to look into it myself, because she's coming home saying that they're still persisting." And that was brought up and used against me during the final hearing, and subsequently, several months after, while she was still at that same school, she was invited to the birthday party of this girl, and I dropped her off. It was at a leisure centre, a school, sorry, a public swimming pool, yeah, and there was some food and so on. I dropped her off and picked her up, and during the course of that, I got to see the girl and the girl's parents, and it immediately struck me that they looked really nice people, like decent people, and I came home and I sort of said to my wife, "I got a feeling that we were misled on this. That this was grossly exaggerated, if there was much in it at all." But I probably um, didn't look into that as much as I should, and I didn't raise it with my older daughter, because I thought it just, you know, potentially create an argument. But I was probably too blind for that. Um, Other things that were coming up in notes in the case: a younger daughter had knocked on the bedroom door of older daughter, begging to help her come home. She also um, there was a note from school, quite heartbreaking. One of the teachers had found her in quite an upset state, and took her aside to talk to her. And she asked what was the matter, and my younger daughter showed her a picture of me carrying her as a baby, hugging her, and she pointed at that, and she was extremely tearful. But of course, that doesn't fit the narrative, so no one's interested in that. There's terrible, terrible emotional abuse of younger daughter, and I believe um, of other children as well. In this regard, I've pasted in the links to two articles um, in the description of this video, and they express concerns about the role of private equity in the fostering care sector. The BBC one, identifying how what I did on the other channel, and raised these issues, because I'd started to get this coordinated coercion from initially the FCA, and then it came round from the local authority, and now I guess by the judge, where these private agencies that have splintered off from local authorities that are all being bought up and consolidated by private equity. And the BBC article identifies that, and the other one's a Guardian article in terms about this extreme consolidation and how it's led to some extremely large private equity owned agencies in consolidated form making very, very large sums of money from this model. And if you read the Guardian article in particular, it even goes down and quotes a financial report from one of them in terms of EBITDA per placement. So EBITDA is basically an accounting proxy for cash flow. So cash flow per child, the extreme commodification of this system, and it's extremely worrying. All the way throughout our case, they were blocking and doing everything they could. If they show any emotion towards the end of meetings, holding hands, hugging, saying we miss you, it was immediately stamped on, saying that they were trying to say that we were passing messages and engaging in emotional abuse. One meeting in January around my birthday time, my daughter was holding on to my arm like that, and she says, "I want to break your arm off if I could, so I can take it back with me to hug." Imagine that. It's appalling. That's the scale of the abuse they put our younger daughter under in terms of stamping out that emotional sterilization of the child to be turned into a cash generative asset. These articles identify that trend extremely effectively, but very sadly. And this is why I started out by challenging the narrative of the FCA, refusing this faux narrative that they wanted to put out there with wealth tech to elevate their own reputation over the welfare of the victims of the financial scandal. It's why I've started to then face threats from the local authority and the FCA in coordinated fashion, the way they were put to me, because I started to look at this wicked industry, how it was being financed, how it was leading into the financial sector, and then challenging the judge in terms of falsification of evidence, complicity with racism, and cultural genocide has led to this state terror that I've been victim to recently. Essentially, you have in Britain senior parliamentarians in the BBC accusing the Chinese of erasing the culture of ethnic Uyghurs in Xinjiang, uh, and yet we do the very same thing. My daughter's a victim of the very same thing here in the United Kingdom to make money for, well, boost the funding of a local authority and to turn her into a cash generative asset to a private equity owned fostering agency. I will continue the videos soon, but in the meantime, take care.